Rodriguez, as she said, and the title of my project is To Refuse or Reciprocate Integrity in Sophocles' Ajax and Philoctetes.
Hey Josh, I'm going to move you a little bit because you're right in front of your slides. Let's just move you. I mean, it's a nice silhouette.
So blame it on Professor Nelson, he said that.
Can everybody see okay? You probably can. Can you see okay? Yeah? Okay.
Just very quickly, I want to go through what inspired this project. I've always loved the Sophoclean tragic formula from when I read Oedipus Rex when I was a sophomore in high school, when I read Antigone as a freshman year. When I decided to become a classics major and the capstone topic idea came up, I knew I wanted to do something more with Sophoclean tragedy. What exactly I would look at in Sophoclean tragedy was something that just fell in place. Philia, or friendship, which is the primary topic of my capstone, was something that many scholars I began reading talked about. And since I examined my own friendships in life, it naturally seemed to fit. It served a dual purpose, to think about the ethics of my own friendships and to think about what Sophocles' plays say about friendship. I also want to remind the audience that I am unique in the sense that I'm a classics major, which focuses on ancient, or what I think is a pejorative term, dead languages, Greek and Latin. The emphasis is on written translation, not on spoken or oral dialogue. Additionally, I will not be speaking much, if any, Greek, except for a few keywords I use to save time. With that said, I just want to give a few thank yous, and then I'll begin. First of all, Professor Christensen for her effort in trying to understand unknown Greek texts she has never read, and also for spending hours trying to convey to me the answer to my so what question. Professor Nelson for his encouragement, and by encouragement I mean overbearing amount of pressure to become a classics major as a sophomore. Alex Alderman for being an outstanding resource in understanding my various references to video games in class. Professor Snee, who I've taken the majority of my classics classes with, including a trip to Egypt. She is part of the eccentric collective personality that attracted me to the classics major. It's unfortunate she is not here, as she is on sabbatical. My friends, I've garnered a lot of support from them, and some of them have even missed their classes or work today to watch me. Bless their souls. My family, specifically my mother, who is here, for without her I would not be here. Alright, again, I'm just Josh Rodriguez, and I did To Refuse or Reciprocate Integrity in Sophocles, Ajax and Philoctetes. So first I'm going to just start by saying my thesis, which shows the purpose of this presentation in my longer paper. Sophocles' plays Ajax and Philoctetes suggest that retaining both the ethos and obligation to reciprocity to one's philos is more important than obeying political superiors, the fate of the polis, or even one's own life. Additionally, the only way I can have a thesis like this is because of an argument made by Stephen Greenblatt. Stephen Greenblatt, a theorist and leader of the New Historicist movement, makes an argument in his piece Shakespeare and the Exorcist. 1. He empowers and elevates literary text to other discourses and historical events of the time period. I quote from Greenblatt's Shakespeare and the Exorcist, where he illustrates this point. History cannot simply be set against literary texts as either stable antithesis or stable background. Thus, literary texts engage in exchange of cultural ideas. Again, I quote Greenblatt's Shakespeare and the Exorcist to illustrate this point. The protective isolation of literary texts gives way to a sense of their interaction with other texts and hence of the permeability of their boundaries. And in my bigger paper, I wrote about how there was an exchange of cultural ideas, and one instance of this was with Thucydides writing about a historical character, Alcibiades, and his actions philosophy related to philia, and also we will actually see in this presentation on how Demosthenes, as a source of the thought of 5th century BC Greece, participates in this exchange of ideas with the nature of foresight and philia. Going back to Stephen Greenblatt, he ultimately shows how Sophocles' plays emerge as viable contributors to the historical discourse of 5th century BC Greece on the nature of philia. And now that we have elevated Ajax and Philoctetes for them to be able to make a contribution to the discourse of the time, we need to establish the notion of philia, which is the primary concern for both plays. The notion of philia is an extension of the Homeric code, helping friends and harming enemies. This is a notion about Greeks that is hardly disputed by scholars. Although there is an emphasis on both helping friends and harming enemies in Greek culture, the Greeks had a greater stake in enforcing help friends than harm enemies. Several writers from classical Greece speak to this issue, one of which is someone we all know, Aristotle, who confirms the importance of friends in Nicomachean Ethics. For friendship is a virtue, or involves virtue, and it is also one of the most indispensable requirements of life. For no one would choose to live without friends, but possessing all other good things. So although harming enemies is a notion that Greeks were familiar with, it was not something that they particularly liked dealing with. And this is an idea that even makes sense in our own culture. And since helping friends has more at stake than harming enemies for the Greeks, this is why my emphasis is placed on philia. Now that we have established the general ethical context of philia, we can move to talking about some of the elements that are in a philia. For the purposes of my paper presentation, I only focused on the two applicable ones to Sophocles' plays. First, the ethos. This concerns the foundation of the philia and the integrity and character of the philia participating in that philia. Conflict of ethos and philia was paramount to Sophocles' tragedies, as it not only helped to generate action, but the action that would arise would also reveal or complicate the ethos of the philia. This allowed opportunity for the play to say something new or complicate ethos. The other primary element of the philia is the philos' obligation or reciprocity. Reciprocity was not a new concept of 5th century BC Greece. Reciprocity was seen through the Homeric times to Sophocles' day as a primary element of the philia. It is important to emphasize that it was not reciprocity as an act of goodwill, but rather an obligation to reciprocate. Charis is a word sometimes used when philia begin a philia with each other. One receives a charis, and one gives a charis. Oftentimes, since reciprocity of a charis was seen as an obligation in filiae, one would sometimes enter into a philia when both parties saw mutual usefulness from each other, almost like a trade or exchange. That's really dry. Now that some of the context and foundational elements of philia have been laid out, I want to switch to the plays themselves. First, we'll look at Philoctetes. Philoctetes really doesn't begin with the play itself, but with a pre-context. The tragic hero Philoctetes was abandoned by Odysseus for 9 years on the island of Lemnos for no other reason than he had a snake bite. It stunk horribly, and it was annoying the Greeks that Philoctetes kept moaning and groaning as it interrupted the religious rituals. Odysseus and the Greeks only returned because it is decreed by fate that Philoctetes or the bow he carries are needed for the Greeks to win the Trojan War. Odysseus gets the son of Achilles, Neoptolemus, to get Philoctetes off the island, but Neoptolemus isn't asked by Odysseus to honorably persuade Philoctetes off the island, rather use treachery and deceit. Neoptolemus is reluctant but agrees. The treachery mainly comes in from Neoptolemus establishing a false philia with Philoctetes. He lies to Philoctetes about his relationship with Odysseus, thus harming ethos, and also makes a false promise to take him home, thus harming his obligation or reciprocity. Although once Philoctetes is given the opportunity to steal the bow, Neoptolemus does not do it. Neoptolemus maintains the ethos of the philia by telling Philoctetes the truth of the situation, and also his obligation or reciprocity by telling Philoctetes he'll take him home. In the end, Heracles appears and tells Philoctetes to go to Troy with Neoptolemus to fulfill his fate, to which, with no argument, Philoctetes agrees. And if you're kind of confused about this picture, it's actually a modern rendition of Philoctetes that was produced in the Brooklyn Theater, and this is Philoctetes' picture